So let's talk about your new survey. What does it show?
So within this survey, we were lucky enough to collect a second wave of the data we collected back in April. This time around, we ended up with over 1,600 responses, almost 1,200 of which were recontact interviews, which means we talked to the exact same people that we talked to months prior. Just to talk about some of the notes, some of the specific findings, we saw a dramatic jump in both favorability and Black vote share. Switching from Biden to Harris, favorability jumped 19 points. We saw great shifts in both support from Black men and Black women. But then noticeably, favorability and vote share also jumped tremendously amongst those who were lower educated, so didn't have a high school education, those who identified as independent, and, as I mentioned before, those who had strong views on abortion, namely opposition to Dobbs. We also saw even the slim support for Trump that we saw back in April, around 13, 14%, drop to even around 12, 11% for likely voters. So, this notion that Trump is getting any sense of Black support, which I already thought was kind of BS going back to April, is completely gone now with Harris at the top of the ticket. Another interesting finding is that we saw a shift generally in how Black people view the Democratic Party. When asked in April how welcoming the Democratic Party is to Black people, 28% saw the party as very welcoming. That jumped up to 36% now, and even higher, 38% of Black people in swing states feel like the Democratic Party is extremely welcoming to Black people. So just having Harris at the top of the ticket also changed views of the party itself. And then Black views of Biden also improved across the board. So favorability, the job he's doing as president, all of those things, Black people are viewing him far more favorable now that he's remained as president, but not necessarily the ticket, the top of the ticket. Lastly, because of the uniqueness of the data and the fact that we were able to collect responses from the same people, we were able to take a look at what's driving these changes and really the why behind this increase in support, increase in favorability, and even increase in turnout. And what really stood out is that what people think of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement, how much they see those things as a threat, contributed a great deal to them supporting Harris over Biden. They think Harris has a better shot at beating Trump, is a better sort of defense to Trump. And then abortion really stood out as well. Respondents who feel like abortion is a great threat to the Black community, who are really worried about abortion bans across the country, also were far more likely to support Harris than they were Biden back in April. And so, again, Harris can really capitalize on this and speak to these issues, but she has to do it in a way, and her campaign has to do it in a way that's very specific and targeted to the Black community, right? You can't talk about democracy broadly. You can't really talk about abortion or like the Republican Party broadly either. You have to make it very clear and connected to the threat to the Black community, talk about how abortion is related to maternal mortality rates in the Black community, and specifically, right, going to have disproportionate effects for Black women if we continue to see these really strict abortion bans across the country. And so I'll leave it there, but I'd love to have questions.
I haven't seen, obviously from a television standpoint, you don't have a lot of Black networks, but I haven't seen a Black specific digital ad. Are you? Let's talk about radio. Are you hearing? Different ads that are very specific on Black radio coming from the campaign?
No, I actually haven't heard much coming from the campaign at all directed towards Black folk. I've seen a few ads from smaller PACs that have put out recently in certain states. Like there was an ad in Georgia, I think, the other day specific to Black people. But again, nothing really from the campaign. This is why I'm really trying to push sort of the results of this survey and this research to the forefront here in this last month and a half of campaigning. Because if you don't do this, if you're not targeting Black people specifically, you're really missing out on an opportunity here to capitalize on turning out the most loyal constituency to the Democratic Party, right? Black people could make the difference in states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, especially North Carolina, now that that's in play. But they're only really going to come out. You can only appeal to Black voters with messages that resonate with their experience. And so again, when the general abortion ad comes on, it's going to do some work, but it's not going to do as much work as a ad specifically directed towards Black people, that represents Black people, that has images of Black women or Black families in the ad, right? These are all things that really need to be taken into consideration that I'm not seeing as much as I would really like to.
Questions from our panel. Teresa, I'll start with you.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for that research and data. Despite not having a commercial that is specifically targeted to Black and Hispanics, what else in your research have shown that there has been an increase in engagement amongst Blacks?
I think another major factor here is sort of identity. And one of the main differences between Black people who supported Biden and those who support Harris is the strength in Black identity, where those who have a really high sense of their self-identity, their racial identity, had a dramatic increase in their support for Harris over Biden over when that switch was made during the 2 waves of the survey. And so, again, I think there's an opportunity here for Harris to use her identity, but it seems like that's something that, similar to the Obama playbook, she's not necessarily wanting to lean heavily into, especially, with all the controversy around her identity early on as she entered the campaign as the nominee. And so there is opportunities there. We know that there are research suggests there's elements of empowerment that could come into play, where you have Black voters and the Black community looking towards Black representatives for special or different kind of representation than they might normally get, creating bonds of trust, increasing engagement in people's wanting to participate and learn about politics. But it has to really be on the part of the campaign to make that connection happen, to show that she will be, a representative that the Black community can really lean into.
Thank you.
Gavin.
Chris, thank you. It's great to hear your insights. I have 2 questions. They're related. One, so I saw a recent NAACP poll. I can't remember who they did the poll in conjunction with, but it was kind of suspect. It showed that 26% of Black men under 50 are supporting Trump. I think the numbers are a bit outdated. They acknowledge that the survey was conducted prior to the DNC, so I'm guessing maybe sometime in late July. But I'm still curious what you make of that finding and how you sort of square it with the data that you all have collected. And then the second part to my question, relatedly, is how do we thread the needle between beating back some of the false narratives about Black men flocking to Trump, while at the same time making clear that we know, to use the VP's words, that Black men aren't in anybody's pockets?
Yeah, I think that the results from the survey you just mentioned do somewhat comport with the findings from the Black Voter Project data. Overall, Black men do support Trump at higher rates than Black women. Back in April, that number was around 20%. It dropped to about 17% with Harris on the ticket, so a slight decline in Trump support among Black men, but it is significantly higher than Black women. There's, a lot of different sort of anecdotal reasons as to why that might be, having to do with sort of patriarchy and understanding of Trump is maybe a business leader. These things that, again, have been floated out there as GOP talking points for years now, some of which might be paying off. Also, though, I think that it's important to understand that when looking at these numbers, especially among younger Black men, they are a bit inflated in the survey world, because unless you're looking particularly at sort of this likely voter sample, you're going to get a lot of people in there suggesting that they support Trump who aren't actual voters, who haven't voted in a while. My data suggests that a good portion of the Black Trump support is coming from people who didn't vote in 2020 or in 2016, so they didn't vote for him before, but they still sort of, when asked these questions on the survey, tend to pick Trump over the other candidate. And so I think that comes into play here as well. So when talking about threading the needle, it's going to be sort of a really tight rope to walk here to make sure that you're not putting too much into this, trying to figure out why Black men are, supporting Trump more than Black women, as a good portion of them are not actual likely voters and really engaged in politics that much. I will say this, though. When you look at the historical numbers of black men supporting just GOP or Republican candidates in general, this isn't out of the ordinary, right? Black men have always had higher support for the Republican Party and Republican candidates than black women. It's not really specific to Trump, even though we might be seeing like a 1 or 2% uptick than the historical average. But we always see around sort of that 15, 16, 17% number among black men, much higher than black women, regardless of who the Republican nominee is.
Rebecca.
Hey, Chris, it's good to see you tonight. So I've heard anecdotes from different black men in regards to trusted messengers. And some of the pushback that I've heard is, why is the Democratic Party thinking that rappers or male entertainers or celebrities are the best, surrogates to talk to black men, to talk about voting and voting issues. So my question is, in your research, have you researched the top trusted messengers for political news for black men? Like, who do they want to hear from?
I think, a lot of black men in particular want to hear from people from the community, but not necessarily these celebrities, unless the celebrities have a still real firm attachment to the community and an ability to relate to the people either through their life or through their music that, isn't normal, right? Most celebrities are seen as being highly removed from the black community altogether. Other research, though, has shown that it's important that we look towards sort of leaders within the community. So here we're talking about possibly pastors, religious clergy, teachers, educators, even different types of athletes, if you will, who have still connections to the community and have sort of a social justice mind frame or platform to direct the attention of these voting blocks when politicians aren't necessarily seen as the most helpful or trusted people themselves. And so there are ways to look beyond sort of the political world to engage the black community. But again, there's a fine line to walk here between looking towards someone to spread this message who's going to be a reliable messenger who people relate to and see a shared struggle with, versus a celebrity who's seen as wildly removed from the community altogether and doesn't have much attachment to the people that they're talking to.
Chris, one of the things that, look, I'm just of the position. First of all, I agree with you. A lot of this stuff is significantly being overblown when it comes to black men. I think about when Stacey Abrams was running in Georgia. Then we saw the exit polling data, and it was like, okay, it was not far off. But the point that I continue to make is that this deals with black men and also black women. Again, the further you get away from the civil rights movement, you're dealing with African Americans who no longer self-identify with a party, which means you have to actually work harder, spend more time talking with them, more time communicating with them, and you have to spend more money trying to reach them because the old methods simply don't work. You don't have the old NAACP infrastructure. You don't. It's not there. You don't actually have the same church infrastructure. It's not there as well. You also have to contend with, in 2024, people who are getting their information. It used to be black radio, Tom Joyner, things along those lines. Now it's Instagram, TikTok. So I just still think, from a campaign standpoint, from these white Democratic strategists, they don't understand that the black voter in 2024, young or older, is totally different than 2014, than 2004, than 1994. And so you have to recognize how to communicate with them in a totally different way to maximize their numbers.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think the data backs that up too. When you look at the groups that shifted the most from moving from Biden to Harris at the ticket, independence was one of those groups, right? And I think that the Democratic Party can really lean into sort of this Harris candidacy as a way to signal we're still here for the Black community. We want to represent the Black community, and Black representation is going to be a priority for the Democratic Party moving forward, right? We see that in the data as independents shifted greatly towards Harris, as they did not for Biden when it came to both favorability and vote share. And we saw that when it comes to how welcoming Black people see the Democratic Party. They see the Democratic Party as, significantly more welcoming with Harris at the top of the ticket. And so, as you mentioned, the party's going to have to do more and do new and extra things to appeal to the Black community than it did before, as these new voters are more independent. Younger voters are more skeptical of politics in general and more weary of politicians.
And again, that goes back to what I say, how you have to educate the voters, which means that you have to have a longer runway. You cannot wait till September and October to begin to have these conversations. You have to be engaging in these conversations much earlier. And I say 6 months earlier. I'm going to say it right now. If you're Democrats and you're talking about the midterm elections in 2026, do you know when you begin? The day after the inauguration, where you begin to talk about and have the communication with people. Because again, what you're seeing is, and you're seeing it in the data, the number of people who say, I don't know what they accomplished, I don't know what they did, that goes to the inability to communicate and message that constantly and repetitively, and going to Black sources to also do that.
Yeah, and in this social media age, as you mentioned, those types of conversations happen less and less. And so when we do focus group work and we actually talk to Black people in the community, voters and non-voters, it's exactly as you said. They're far more likely to recognize what Trump will do to harm them than they will to recognize what the Democratic Party, Biden or Harris, has done or will do to help them. Because those are much longer conversations. They're much harder to have, but they take a lot of work and effort. But those are the conversations that will build trust, that will bring up efficacy and confidence in the party and in our political institutions in the long run. And so if we do want to see consistently high Black turnout, consistently high Black voter knowledge and interest in elections, we have to build those bridges. And it takes years and years of work, right? We saw some of that started during the Obama era, but Trump's presidency essentially wiped a lot of that progress out when it came to sort of Black interest in politics and Black people feeling like they had an opportunity to be a part of the political system and have their voices heard.
Last question I have for you. A new round of polls dropped out showing Harris with 1 to 3 point lead. One place was 5 point in Arizona, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. I've been looking at your tweets over the past week, and you've been laying out that if they want to build upon those numbers, especially in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, you're talking Milwaukee, but also North Carolina, it really means leaning in on, as you said earlier, the people who are likely going to vote for you. You can keep trying. Look, I get, because the Republicans against Trump or the Republicans for Kamala, they just dropped a new ad. I totally get appealing to them. I totally get the Nikki Haley people who are endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. But when you're inside of 40 days, your focus has to be on low-hanging fruit. Who is likely going to be on my side? And in those key places, the margin of 5, 7, 8, 10, 15,000 voters, that's Black.
That's exactly right. And, when you have 80, 90% of Black voters in some of these states, right, you look at some of these recent polls of Georgia and North Carolina, Black support for Harris is at 85%, 92% in a recent poll in North Carolina. That's the group you want to target. You turn out 100 voters, 92 of them are voting for you. Right. You just got to get people out off their couch to the polls rather than spending money, taking chances as to a 50-50 shot if you get someone to the polls or you change someone's mind. Right. And so the investment here, the smart money goes on mobilizing Black voters from here on out.
All right, Chris Towler, we so appreciate it. Hey, if somebody wants to go in depth, y'all research, where do they go?
Yeah, blackvoterproject.com. or blackinsightsresearch.com. Both the websites include analysis and results from the data, as well as top lines from this most recent wave. blackinsightsresearch.com also has additional research reports and newsletters available.
In 2016, Donald Trump said he would choose only the best people to work in his White House. Now those people have a warning for America. Trump is not fit to be president again. Here's his vice president.
Anyone who puts themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. It should come as no surprise that I will not be endorsing Donald Trump this year.
His defense secretary.
Do you think Trump can be trusted with the nation's secrets ever again?
No. I mean, it's just irresponsible action that places our service members at risk, places our nation's security at risk.
His national security advisor.
Donald Trump will cause a lot of damage. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump.
And the nation's highest-ranking military officer.
We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator.
Take it from the people who knew him best. Donald Trump is a danger to our troops and our democracy. We can't let him lead our country again.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.